Thank you, everyone, for your patience as we get started, and welcome to this evening's event. I'm very excited. I'm Sarah Linda Bauer. I'm the project coordinator for the Missouri Review's Miller Conversations on Literary Publishing. And tonight, I am so honored and thrilled to welcome our final guest in the series, Jericho Brown. So this series has been made possible by a generous grant, a student success enhancement grant from the Office of the Provost. So thank you, Office of the Provost. The Missouri Review, which is now in its 47th year of continuous publication, embarked on this year-long project to create a digital archive of conversations with writers, editors, and publicists about the life cycle of a literary work. And it's the magazine's first series of its kind. Our first conversation that we had featured Rachel Yoder. She was a former Missouri Review Editor's Prize winner in fiction, and she discussed her widely acclaimed debut novel, Night Bitch. This book was released as a feature film last December, starring Amy Adams, in December. And for our second installment, we welcomed New York Times bestselling author Leslie Jamison for a conversation about her new memoir, Splinters. And as I mentioned before, this is the third and final event of the series, and we're bringing you the conversation with Jericho Brown, and he will be talking about his experience writing, editing, and publishing his very powerful collection, The Tradition. I want to thank all of the staff and students and you, the community, who has supported this series from the beginning, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have this very intimate room full of all of you. These events have been really special for me. What has been so memorable for me for each of these events has been the setting and really the authors themselves. You know, our setting has been small like this, and that's been intentional. And the authors, they have been personal, gracious, and real. It's easy to get starstruck with some of these authors. We've been in rarefied air, and every one of them has just been a delight. In a few moments, our managing editor, Marc McKee, will talk with Jericho Brown, who is also a poetry colleague and, until yesterday, a good friend he hadn't seen in quite some time. Jericho Brown is the author of 3 collections of poetry: The Tradition in 2019, a finalist for the 2019 National Book Award and winner of the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry; The New Testament, which won the Ainsfield Wolf Book Award and was named one of the best of the year by the Library Journal, Cold Front, and the Academy of American Poets; and Please, which won the 2009 American Book Award. He is also the editor of the anthology How We Do It: Black Writers on Craft, Practice, and Skill, and The Selected Shepherd, a new retrospective on the work of the important and sometimes controversial Black gay poet Reginald Shepherd. Jericho is also the recipient of the 2024 MacArthur Fellow. He is the director of English and the Creative Writing Program and a professor at Emory University in Atlanta. I could go on. So, poetry is a truth teller, at least in my opinion. Not the scientific truth, but the alchemical. The alchemy of words, the truth of words. The hard truths, the sweetest truths, even the meanest. You may not know you need a poem, and then you read one or listen to one. Wow. There it is. Jericho's work is known for its honesty, vulnerability, and themes of violence and homosexuality. The New Testament and Pleas offered lyricism, musical reference, literally, thank you, Janis Joplin, and tenuous religion. But we're here to talk about the tradition, a breakthrough introducing his poetic form, the duplex, shaking up the craft and laying down a new tradition. When I read the tradition, thinking about the now of today and feeling the then, the past and the present, both active. America experienced by people like me, Black Americans. I found the spiritual, the ancestral, articulated on the page in a way difficult to explain, but it is how we share and survive, and how we've loved or not each other, and how we have husbanded the earth. For me, the tradition is at once unrestrained, concise, and subtle, with language that sneaks up on one's emotions, poking at what one thinks is expected, but deftly delivering targeted blows with the elegance of a takuba sword. There is hope when you feel. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Jericho Brown.
That is very kind. A big thank you to Sarah Linda for that beautiful introduction. I don't know why I come to Missouri and everybody keeps trying to make me cry. Thank you, Sarah Linda. I would like for us, not just because of that introduction, but because of all the work that she's done to make tonight happen, please give Sarah Linda a hand. Thank you, Sarah Linda. And I also have to say thank you to all of the people who work with the Missouri Review, including Mark and Kylan, Chris and Deidre, and of course, Spear. I'm very happy to be with you. I've always wanted to do something at this particular school. I always feel like I want to go where I've heard the best gossip. People are gossiping about this school all over the world and in every discipline. If you talk to somebody about Mizzou, there's some good gossip that comes around. So I'm really hoping that I get to be a part of that. I can't wait to be a part of American lore. Until then, though, I'm going to read you some poems. Can I read you some poems? Where I'm from, we always begin with prayer. So, prayer of the backhanded. Not the palm, not the pear tree switch, not the broomstick, nor the closest extension cord, not his braided belt, but God, Bless the back of my daddy's hand, which, holding nothing tightly against me and not wrapped in leather, eliminated the air between itself and my cheek. Make full this dimpled cheek, unworthy of its unfisted print, and forgive my forgetting the love of a hand hungry for reflex, a hand that took no thought of its target, like hail from a blind sky, involuntary, fast, but brutal in its bruising. Father, I bear the bridge of what might have been a broken nose. I lift to you what was a busted lip. Bless the boy who believes his best beatings lack intention, the mark of the beast. Bring back to life the son who glories in the sin of immediacy, calling it love. God, save the man whose arm, like an angel's invisible wing, may fly backward in fury, whether or not his son stands near. Help me hold in place my blazing jaw as I think to say, excuse me. I'm originally from Shreveport, Louisiana. I left there and I lived for a while in New Orleans, Louisiana. I left there and I met Marc McKee in Houston, Texas. And then I got my first job teaching full-time at the University of San Diego, which is where I found out that I have an accent. And upon finding out I have an accent, I became lonely for certain words and phrases that I was used to hearing in the South. One of those words is the title of this next poem. That word is the word nim. Nim means that person and everyone you associate with that person. To give you an example of how that word works, imagine growing up with a person and being close to that person. When you knew them as well as their family. If you don't see them for a while and then you see them again, let's say in the grocery store, as you are pushing your buggy, you might see them and say, hey, how you doing? How is your mama? And them. And that's how that word works. Nim. They said to say goodnight and not goodbye. Unplugged the TV when it rained. They hid money in mattresses, so to sleep on decisions. Some of their children were not their children. Some of their parents had no birth dates. They could sweat a cold out of you. They'd wake without an alarm telling them to. Even the short ones reached certain shelves. Even the skinny cooked animals too quick to catch. And I don't care how ugly one of them arrived. That one got married to somebody fine. They fed families with change and wiped their kitchens clean. Then another century came. People like me forgot their names. This next poem is about a television show that I used to like when I was a kid. It's so old, none of you have ever heard of it before. It's called The Jeffersons. The only thing you may need to know before I read the poem is that the leading lady of The Jeffersons had a very special voice, such that when she said her husband's name, it always sounded like George. Louise Jefferson's voice would say George, George. And she was played by a woman named Isabel Sanford. Sitcom. A rabbit tried to kill Louise once when I was a kid. I'm saying Louise now, but I'd have said Miss Louise then as she appeared on our screens once a week wearing blues I haven't seen since. Her long hair curled, combed out, and pushed up into a volume so thick you felt both the power of an afro and the requirement of a relaxer on a woman rounder than most of her penthouse neighbors, hair that wouldn't move no matter how much she shook when she yelled at her husband or when trapped by a man dressed as a rabbit who wielded a snub-nosed .38 special we thought scary before we knew what an AR-15 could do. Miss Louise never sang, but she had a voice that left you wondering how singing might sound on her. She was that beautiful and dark. They had a grown son. She wasn't a young woman. By the time I saw the Halloween rerun, the youngest men in my hometown had organized themselves into colors, red and blue. They were patriots. They'd shoot. Like patriots, they'd shoot. And they'd shoot each other, too. They'd shoot you if you accidentally scuffed their shoes at a club or a concert. They'd shoot driving by from their cars into houses and parks. They'd sell you something so good you'd sell our TV to get more of it. And I cannot say I didn't love them. They killed my first girlfriend, a stray bullet meant for her brother, and I loved them. They killed my cousin, but some of them were my other cousins, and I still loved us in all my fear of our gold teeth and oversized dickies. They'd kill me today, yet remain a problem I mean to solve. I'm grown now. I know Louise was the star of the show, the leading lady. No writer would kill her off on a sitcom. Murder is meant for real life. Anybody can get a gun, but nobody kills Louise Jefferson. There is a place where Black people don't die, a deluxe apartment in the sky. All week I worried about the next episode. Mornings I dressed myself and my little sister, making sure we wore nothing that looked like the flag. And when the appointed night fell, the jokes were still funny. The rabbit apprehended. The white rabbit didn't murder the black lady. No, not on TV. I wrote this next poem after finding out about and being confounded by the very long list of people who have committed suicide while in police custody. That list includes people like Jesus Huerta in North Carolina, who after having been handcuffed, after having been patted down on the walk from the police cruiser to the building where he was to be booked, supposedly somehow managed to shoot himself in the back corner of his head. Victor White III in Louisiana, where I'm from, who after having been patted down, while handcuffed, sitting in the back seat of a police cruiser, supposedly somehow managed to shoot himself in his upper back. Sandra Bland in Texas, who after a day of fighting for her life was put in a jail cell where there is a live video feed. Every one of the jail cells in that county have a live video feed. Sandra Bland then hung herself with a trash bag while in that jail cell. According to the coroner, she hung herself at the exact same moment that live video feed has technical difficulty and goes out. And therefore, though you can see Sandra Bland in the jail cell for that part of her life, you do not see her hang herself with a trash bag because the video feed goes out. Bullet points. I will not shoot myself in the head, and I will not shoot myself in the back. And I will not hang myself with a trash bag. And if I do, I promise you, I will not do it in a police car while handcuffed or in the jail cell of a town I only know the name of because I have to drive through it to get home. Yes, I may be at risk, but I promise you, I trust the maggots who live beneath the floorboards of my house to do what they must to any carcass more than I trust an officer of the law of the land to shut my eyes like a man of God might, or to cover me with a sheet so clean my mother could have used it to tuck me in. When I kill me, I will do it the same way most Americans do. I promise you, cigarette smoke, or a piece of meat on which I choke, or so broke I freeze in one of these winters we keep calling worst. I promise if you hear of me dead anywhere near a cop, then that cop killed me. He took me from us and left my body, which is, no matter what we've been taught, greater than the settlement a city can pay a mother to stop crying, and more beautiful than the new bullet fished from the folds of my brain.
Say that.
That's a poem from my most recent book, The Tradition, which we are celebrating tonight. Another feature of the book, The Tradition, is a form I invented called the duplex. The duplex is at once a hustle, a sonnet, and a blues poem. And I'll read one for you now. I believe you'll hear all of those formal elements come through in this example. Duplex. I begin with love, hoping to end there. I don't want to leave a messy corpse. I don't want to leave a messy corpse full of medicines that turn in the sun. Some of my medicines turn in the sun. Some of us don't need hell to be good. Those who need most need hell to be good. What are the symptoms of your sickness? Here is one symptom of my sickness. Men who love me are men who miss me. Men who leave me are men who miss me in the dream where I am an island. In the dream where I am an island, I grow green with hope. I'd like to end there. I love poetry so much, I hope that's clear. There's only one thing in this world that I love more than poetry, and that is cuddling. I could think, I believe that I, as a person on earth, right, that I could think while I am in bed cuddling, I could, if it had not already been written by Yeats, I could think of sailing to Byzantium, every line of it. And if that meant I had to get out of the bed to type it and stop cuddling, then that would have never been written. Stand. Peace on this planet, or guns glowing hot. We lay there together as if we were getting something done. It felt like planting a garden or planning a meal for a people who still need feeding. All that touching, or barely touching, not saying much, not adding anything. The cushion of it, the skin, and occasional sigh, all seemed like work worth mastering. I'm sure somebody died while we made love. Somebody killed somebody black. I thought then of holding you as a political act. I may as well have held myself. We didn't stand for one thought, didn't do a damn thing. And though you left me, I'm glad we didn't. Thank you so much.
What a thrill and an honor it is to have Jericho Brown here with us tonight for the Miller Conversation Series. Thank you. I feel like I've got to fill a little bit of time as we all calm down from the beauty and the brilliance of that
So
reading.
sweet. Thank you.
But it truly is a gift to have you here. Now, being that the Miller Conversations were conceived of as our way of creating a digital archive in which we're talking about the life cycle of a book, we're here tonight to talk about the tradition, the 2020 Pulitzer Prize winner, a much lauded and a book that lives on and on and on. And I want to start with Genesis. I would like to hear the experience that you had in writing the poems that came to form up this miraculous collection. I mean, what's the oldest poem in the book? What are the ones that kind of like then start to cluster for you so that you understand, like, I'm writing, you know, I'm making a collection of these poems and they're talking to each other.
I don't know if I remember exactly what the oldest poem is in the book, but I think it's Stand, which is the last poem I just read. I wasn't going to read that poem, and then you mentioned that this might be an option for a question. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I should read that poem. Then if he does ask that, people will know what the hell I'm talking about. Right. And the reason I think it was the oldest is I must have read it at the Furious Flower Poetry Conference at James Madison University in Virginia. It's a Black poetry conference that meets once every 10 years. Oh, wow. The book before this, which means it was in 2014. And the book before this book is a book called The New Testament, which would have come out in 2014, which means I was probably gasping for poems. You know, like, oh God, please send, you know, when you finish a book, it's like, where's the next poem? Right. So, and I remember reading Stand there, and I remember the feeling of having a new poem. Oh God, thank you, a new poem. Do you understand what I mean? Right, yeah. And I remember people reacting to it. You know, you read a poem and a couple of people tell you they like it, and then you're like, okay, well, maybe I'll have a book and this poem will be in it someday. Right. So I would say Stand is indeed the oldest poem, and I think it's a really good example of what I believe happens in the tradition, and maybe just of my poetics or my own philosophy, if not about poetry, then about life. I think that the poem formally is interesting to me because obviously it's depending on an occasional rhyme, and every once in a while you sort of fall into these I-ams, and I think that is something that I'm often doing in poetry, and part of what the tradition is about is form and formality, and ways in which you improvise forms and break forms and make use of them or fight against them and subvert them. And then the book is also just about the tradition. How do you love your nation? How do you love your people, your community? We're all a part of several communities. Your community in the nation. How do you love your family? And I think the poem is a really good example of the way I would like to be remembered as a poet, though you can't, you know, you can't make it happen. I keep telling people, because I think if I say it, then I'll do it, but I'm not sure. But, you know, I think I'm a love poet more than I'm anything else. If you just want to give me a subject, I write poems about being in love and about losing love and about people who are in love or once were or want to be. And I think that desire of mine to be a love poet and to write poems that have love at their base has been how all of my poems have been made, and really has a lot to do with me thinking about what poetry is and how to revise a poem, how to include what Sarah Linda was talking about when she introduced me, that wonderful introduction. The word that I love most about that introduction was the word hope. You know, and to think that she reads my work and thinks of that word is very important to me, actually, because I think that is what I'm doing when I am writing a poem. I'm creating a kind of artifact of hope. Right. Right?
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean,
so
it does feel to me as though, in some respect, that speaks to the variousness of form that comes through in the tradition, or even making your own form, which we'll talk about more later. But it feels as though the kinds of love that you're interested in kind of like finding durable expression of is one of the things that leads you to the different forms that you employ. I
You're
mean,
so smart, Mark. That's smart. No, that's very smart. I gave this answer and then you said that. Now I'm like, oh no, just let him talk.
that is not what we're here for.
We were never in workshop. We went to school together, but we were never in
We
workshop
weren't
together.
in one? Come on, I think
I
we were
don't
in
think-
Steve Orland's workshop.
You were in that workshop?
I've heard you talk before about the tradition. Like, so I mean, maybe it starts in fits and pieces, and I know that like you have a dedication to the unit of the poem rather than the kind of like the collection itself, which is something that feels like if we're looking at the last like 10, 15 years of poetry, it's hard not to look at certain collections and go like, well, that is a project book. These poems were made to fill out something, and I know that your interest is more in, well, is it a good poem? It maybe shouldn't go in a book if it's not a good poem. I don't care what it does. So what are some of the poems that came to you in the course of what would eventually be the tradition where you were like, okay, this is starting to kind of like, these are conversations that are starting to happen between these poems?
I think many of the poems in the last section are poems in direct conversation with a poem like Stand, because that section of the book is quite literally about falling in love. Maybe there's a little bit of falling out of love in there too. And so in a lot of those poems, there was this period, I was talking about this in a conversation yesterday, and this is what Mark is referring to. There's a period between I would say Thanksgiving of 2017 and Martin Luther King Day of 2018, and I wrote half the book in that time. And I could not stop writing. I was pulling over my car in order to write stuff down. I would get whole entire poems that I'd be really excited about. You know, you have your poetry friends that you send poems to. And I would send my friend Michael Shoemaker or Michael Dumanis or Malachi Black, I would send them a poem in the morning because I'd been up all night writing it. And then I would send them another poem at 3 o'clock. And then I would send them another poem, at midnight.
Right.
And they would all say, when did you write these poems? And I said, I wrote them and then I sent them to you. Like, you're lying, Jericho. And I remember Michael Shoemaker would be like, you have got to be. I mean, he would get poem after poem. He's like, what is going on? And at some point, I really did think I was going to die. Because the only thing I've ever really, I mean, maybe there are other things that I can do, but the only thing that I could really put my finger on that was like a productive thing that I could do well was write a poem. And because I was getting all of these, really, when I say getting,
Receiving.
yeah, it was really strange and scary. Getting all of these poems at once, I was like, oh my God, I guess when this stops, I'm gonna die because I will have written all the poems I was meant to write.
Right.
So I was like talking to my sister about my wheel. It was weird. It was just a strange time. And there's a way that the poems that I had written before that began to take shape and could be more easily revised because of the poems I was writing during that period.
Oh, right.
Some of those poems, a poem like Hero, for instance, and For a Day in the Morning, two poems in which my mother or the speaker's mother appears. I was
Yeah, we'll get to that.
I was particularly proud of those poems because, I had spent my first 2 books, I have 3 books of poetry. The first 2, I really let my dad have it. And I finally wrote this book in which my mom got hers too, you know? And so, when I wrote those poems in that first half after I finished the New Testament. I was very slowly writing poems. And I literally printed every line that I had written that was more than 11 syllables long. And I called that a long line. Right. And I took every line that I had written that was a long line, and any line that mentioned my mom, I cut out on a sliver of paper. And I took all the lines that mentioned my mom and I arranged them associatively until I ended up with this poem that ended up being called For a Day in the Morning. And that poem, and then the other, you're asking about like what they have to do with each other and how thematic, concern is built. That poem sort of stood there and I was like, oh, well, that's pretty good. Let's see what I can do with this. Like, what happens if I send it to Michael Dumanis? Is he gonna tell me it's not a poem, which happens. And then And then I had these lines left over, so I could make them into the poem that turned out to be Hero. That's how those two poems were made. And often, I mean, the duplexes were made in this way. So often thematic concern is built because of the way I write poems when I'm not receiving them.
Right.
There's a way that I write poems which has to do with the pastiche, with juxtaposition, with imagining that if I wrote a line, that I'm a poet and therefore that ought to be in a poem. There's this one sentence in 4 Day in the Morning, and I think it is the sentence I'm proudest of ever having written, because it made it into a poem and I thought it never would. And the sentence is, it's a part of a longer line, but the sentence is, I love my mother. And it's the very kind of thing that would get cut out of a poem in workshops.
Sure.
But I kept up with it. I mean, obviously I love, who doesn't love their mother? Right? Well, child.
Yeah. I got a list.
So like having a sentence like that and holding on to it for years, really, holding on to it and thinking, maybe there's a reason why that doesn't get cut out.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then coming upon the poem that creates that reason for it to stay.
That opens up space for
and
it.
I just believe that about poetry, that you know, we write something and we get frustrated. Our students often, the other thing I should have mentioned is I met some of the undergrads here who were absolutely brilliant, and I appreciate it. I had lunch with them, and thank y'all so much. Anyway, so, but I very, you know, when you write a poem and the poem fails, that's great, because every poem has at least one good line in it. And that means that that line is waiting for you, it seems to me, to have the experiences necessary to write the other lines. This is why you need to like fall in love and get your heart broken and ride roller coasters and travel to Bali. Do you understand what I mean? Because then suddenly you have other lines that meet that line.
Right.
And that's, for me, how thematic concern is built. I realize lines exist, and then I'm looking for them in other things that I write and other things I see in the world. And then those things start to matter. And I know what my concerns are as a human being, so I don't expect my poems to do something other than my concerns, although this is also a huge desire from young poets, from my students. My students don't want to write about what they think about. They're so like convinced that there's shame. You know, this is the wonderful thing, I think at least, about there are many wonderful things. One of the wonderful things about being a poet is the opportunity to embrace all the things that the world tells you should be ashamed of. You know, I wouldn't be, it does feel funny, I have to say. I'm 48 years old, and when people introduce me, or when, you know, like somebody's reading a bio and like something about that makes it clear that I'm queer, I'm like, oh shit, everybody know my tea. Do you know what? I still feel that. It's so funny because I'm like literally famous for being gay. But it's like so hilarious. Isn't that funny? Like, but even you know what I'm saying?
That's
but I
maybe
think,
a diminution.
But
of
I
what
would
you're
have
famous
never,
for, but-
I would have never learned to love that about myself if I wasn't a poet. You know, I need it, like when, you know, you're not, I mean, I tell my students this, you know, my students really expect to write a poem like this. Writing my poem, ooh, it's good, it's going down. I'm writing my poem, things are coming to me, girl, I can write. And something happens. There's a thing that comes down and it goes through their fingers onto those keys and they're like, I'm not talking about that. So as soon as I get over that, okay, here we go, back to my poem. And then I get the poem and they're like, why are you telling me my poem is not good, Dr. Brown? And I'm like, well, there's something right here missing.
Yeah.
That it seems like you skipped over the point. I don't know what it is because I can't see it. Do you understand what I mean? And so I think you have to have, I mean, the tradition seemed to me the point at which I was closest to the parts of myself that before that I felt shame in. I mean, it's difficult talking about poetry like this because I don't think poetry is therapy.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, if you need therapy, you should see a therapist.
Yeah.
And one way to prove
That's the full endorsement of the Missouri Review as well.
Yeah.
Seek a therapist.
I
if you
mean,
need
one way to
therapy.
prove it is, you know, the mental illness and obvious just bad behavior by some of our favorite poets. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, you know, just because you write great poems doesn't mean
Yeah, it
the
fixed
mind
you.
is working well. well or that you're good. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So I think just how things came together is a real trust in myself and looking for, feeling bold enough to say things that I otherwise would not have said. Also, you know, there's a certain amount of rage, I think, in the tradition. Sarah Linda mentioned the subtle element of the book, and there is something about the book where I found myself over and over again in order to write the poems, and this has a lot to do with the formal elements of the book. In order to write the poems, I needed to tamp down on the thing.
Right.
And so then I had something to work with, right? I'm sort of working with the process of, I would really like to cuss the following people out, but just cussing people out ain't a poem.
Right.
So how do I manage that? How do I structure that? How do I layer that? How do I give that resonance?
Don't you feel like that constraint, though, actually makes the anger and the rage more resonant?
Yeah.
It makes it more durable. It makes it like you can't look away from this because you're not just getting cussed out and going like, oh, I can't.
Yeah,
So,
I
who
hope so.
cares?
I mean, I hope so. I mean, that's definitely how I read when I'm reading
Well, that's
poetry.
I mean, that's
you know?
the feeling that I'm getting
Yeah,
from the
yeah.
tradition.
Yeah,
It's there. It's like you just can't do anything but face it.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't want to pivot too far here, but like I do want to kind of like talk a little bit about your experience with Copper Canyon because the New Testament is your like first book with them. It's your second book.
Second book, yeah.
And then the tradition comes out. I'd like to talk a little bit before we get into some of the other themes of the book, and I really want to talk about the speakers because I'm very excited to kind of hear you opine about like the way that the speakers shift from poem to poem in the tradition. It's really amazing to me. But I'm just curious about a little backstory before we get there with Copper Canyon. How did you come to publish the New Testament with them first? I mean, that's your first kind of like the beginning of your kind
my
of like,
career
relationship with them.
Yeah, you know, it's funny about the New Testament. I like the book a lot. I think it has some poems. I read a poem from the New Testament tonight called Nim, which I also think is pretty representative of that book and the way I was thinking about poetry being a coming together of community and where I stood within a community in that book. But I don't know, you know, the thing about the tradition I have to say that is very different, and also the reason why I think it does the work it does in the world is it's the first book I didn't have to write, but I wrote it anyway. So it's the only book in the world that really proves that I'm a poet. You know, if I wasn't going to finish my PhD program or get a job if I didn't write Please, my first book.
Right.
And I wasn't gonna get tenure, which means I would have been fired if I didn't, which is so fascinating to me, these jobs, you know, it's like you gotta write a book to keep your job, isn't that something? But so I sent the book to Copper Canyon in slush,
Right.
just because I was sending it, and it was rejected some of everywhere else, and I think they were interested in it in a couple places other than Copper Canyon, but I really wanted Copper Canyon because at the time they seemed to me a very strong poetry press, and I was really excited to be a part of a poetry press, a press that really concentrated on poetry, and therefore would have its people thinking about how to market a book of poetry, because I don't want to.
Right.
I want to write poems,
Right.
you know, and they had a publicist. Her name's Kelly Forsyth, and she's not working with Copper Canyon anymore, but I got so much attention for the New Testament because of Kelly Forsyth, and that seemed like a big deal reason to go there. They also had the first editor that I have ever had who actually made suggestions for what I was supposed to do with my book, and I love that, you know. Michael read the book and called me and told me things that I should do. The tradition, which we're talking about today, is a little bit of a different story because he had been calling me like every month asking me if I could send him something so that he could schedule me for 2019. And I kept telling him, no, I don't have anything. Leave me alone, you know, because it was really giving me anxiety. Like, I'm a slow writer, and I felt like my editor is like on my back about making a book, and I don't see why I gotta make a book, you know. And so I don't need tenure, you know. It's like, I thought the whole point was you get tenure and take long naps. So when I started writing all those crazy poems, I was like, oh shit, I might have a book that could come out in 2019. I mean, this thing that never happened to me happened, and maybe I can. And I remember I said, I called him on the phone and I said, hey, remember when you kept asking me? And he was like, you cussed me out. I was like, yeah, I want to apologize about that. Because I think I might have something by the, I asked him, by when would I need to be done? And he had said something like April in order to make a 2000. I was like, I think I might be done by April. It could have been March, but I think it was April. And he said, I don't know, like, you know, I don't know if we have the space. He was like, but send me what you got. So I sent him the poems I had been writing, and he called me back. And he said, hell yeah, we're publishing. He's so great. I mean, you know, your editor is talking to you like using the word hell. It's like, come on, Michael Wiegers, you know? So I was like, I'm in the Copper Canyon family. So that's sort of how those books ended up with Copper Canyon. I mean, a similar thing happened with my book covers. I was able to choose both of them, and they've always been very good about finding.
All three of the book covers are stunning.
Oh, I mean, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. That means the world to me. I always wanted to. It's important to me actually that the book be really a beautiful thing on its own, because then people will buy it and put it on their coffee table. Like, you don't have to read it. I just want you to buy it.
Reading is just a bonus.
I tell people this all the time. You know, books are really great gifts too. They're really, I mean, and just because when somebody gives me a book for Christmas or my birthday, I don't have to read it. I mean, I probably will, but you feel like, oh my God, this person is giving me education? Right? It's beautiful.
Just giving you worlds.
Giving me somebody's imagination as a gift, I just think it's really nice.
In your experience with Michael and the rest of that team, were there ever any kind of like, either like eureka moments where like, oh, he's really right about this, or were there like more like moments where you're just like, no, he's not right about that?
He's always right. I mean, he's never right and always right. He's always right that something's up. He's just wrong about what it is. And he makes really bad suggestions. Like Michael, like, oh God, thank God you're an editor, because that's bad writing that you are trying to get me to do. Like, he'll try to say, oh, you should say this instead at this line. At which time I'll be like, well, why would I say that? Because I'm a bad poet? Because I don't know how language works? Like, that's crazy. But the line that he's pointing out, he's absolute. I'll see. He'll say what's wrong with the line, and I'll think to myself, well, that's not what's wrong with the line, but there is something. So every time we have this wonderful thing happening where he'll read a book, so far anyway, he'll read a book, and then 2 books. He'll read a book and he'll send me the notes back. And I read the notes, and I literally do everything that is necessary such that any suggestion that he has made has been covered. I don't take the suggestion, but I cover it. And then the next time he reads it, he says this. He doesn't know. I mean, actually, he knows this whole story, but he doesn't know this part. He reads it and he says, hey, I thought something was wrong here, but this is really great. I don't know what I was talking, because I won't do the thing that he said, but things will be different enough that he can say, okay, something's better. He's changed.
Yeah, you trust him like an alarm system. It's like, it's like, oh, well, something.
It's very good,
And he's like, oh, I can disregard whatever else you said, but like, I'll check it out.
Poets are this way. When I was editing for The Believer magazine, I would notice that poets you tell them to do something, but you couldn't tell them what to do. Because if you tell them what to, like you would think you had the best perfect answer, and then they might think it too, but they're like, I can't do that. That means I didn't write it.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn you just to kind of point,
No, that's really wise. There's something I want to ask. There's so many things to talk about with the tradition, but one of the things I find most astonishing, it's singularly brilliant. It feels like, for whatever this is worth, it feels like you. But the shift in speaker in across the collection, I mean, there are so many different ones. And I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about your kind of relationship to the speakers of your poems. Does the speaker arrive in advance of the poem itself, or is it a decision that you come to later? There's any number. I mean, I'm thinking of one of the I think of the riddle, and some other ones where some seem to fall closer to what we would. I mean, anybody who's a casual, even a casual reader of poetry should know that the poet and the speaker is not synonymous. But we're still inclined. If we hear at I, or if we a particular experience is rendered very personally. It's how do you kind of navigate those things and come up with these generative speakers that allow you to kind of bring so much out of the worlds that you're giving us?
I think there are a few things that I have to say that are in the background of this question, and the first one is that when I was really devouring poetry, which is when I was getting my PhD, the thing I miss about that time of my life is I was reading a book of poetry every day. I love to be reading a book of poetry every day. I would quite literally go to the library at U of H in the morning, check out a book somewhere in the course of the day, read it, and then the next day turn it back in and get another book, Really beautiful moment for me. And that's how I ended up reading all of the books of the poet I, who only wrote in dramatic monologue her entire career. And I remember when you spell her name A-I, by the way, which is hugely problematic at this point. I always want to I was like, girl, I wish you had a last name. Right. You're not doing so well out here. Right. Anyway, but it was very inspirational to me, the idea that you could have so many speakers and so many kinds of speakers in a single book. And something about that became not only inspiring, but challenging as I began to make books. And definitely as I was making the tradition, I wanted to create a world in which every poem was its own poem. No matter how much thematic concern the entire collection had in common, I wanted every poem to be its own poem. And one way to actually push that forward was to switch speakers in a row, such that when people are reading, they don't have to think this is Jericho Brown. They can begin, books teach us to read them. And I think if the tradition teaches you something, it's like, I don't know who's going to be talking when I read this poem, so I better just focus on reading this poem. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot of what happened in that moment. And I also think one of the things that I learned from my teachers, who I have all the respect in the world for, I love my poetry teachers, even the ones that I didn't love. I learned that the word persona actually in the Greek translates mask, which really for me meant that no matter who the speaker was, I would still be using everything I have, as I do in any poem, in order to bring that speaker's voice to life in the poem. So there's this moment in a poem like Track 5, Summertime, the poem in the voice of Janis Joplin from my first book. There's a moment where I say, I'm such an ugly girl, I'm such an ugly girl. And there's something about me being Jericho Brown that allows me to say that in spite of the fact that I ain't never been ugly or a girl. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so in that moment, I'm wearing a mask, but I'm also completely being myself, if that makes sense. So I don't, in the tradition, I did want a multitude of speakers, and I think that also happens, so that's the background, but this is the foreground, and this is to answer your question. When I'm writing a poem, I'm fascinated that people think this way. I never wanted to be a journalist. It's just not. I get that. I understand the value of journalism. We don't have it in the United States, but I understand.
Right.
It would be nice.
I've read about it.
Yeah, it seems a thing of the past,
Right.
Or becoming a thing of the past,
Sure.
right? But it's just not an interest of mine. It's not a thing I've wanted to do. Therefore, I've never been under the impression that something I say in a poem needs to be true, whatever, or a fact, whatever the hell that is, right?
Yeah.
Or while I'm writing a poem, I have never imagined that I am the speaker. I have never thought that, Mark. Do you know what I'm saying? Like when I'm reading, I think a lot of this has to do with how I came into poetry and the poems I was most attracted to as a kid. A poem like Ego Tripping by Nikki Giovanni. She says, I was born in the Congo. That's the first line of the poem. I'm looking like, this woman was not born in the Congo. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. The Negro Speaks of Rivers by Langston Hughes. Like, it's like, that's not Langston Hughes. That's a Negro speaking of rivers. Do you know what I mean? And so I have this, or We Wear the Mask. We wear the mask that grins and lies. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So thinking about people like Paul Laurence Dunbar and that we in his poem, that's not Paul Laurence Dunbar. That's a we. Yeah. If I must die. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let me nobly die. Right? Like it's, it's not. It's an I that is the uber super I, the ultimate I.
Yeah.
Right.
It's almost the speaker is an instrument.
Yes.
By which you're amplifying, the artist has concerns to get across, but but the speaker can be the instrument for that to kind of arrive in the most kind of grand or kind of important way that.
Exactly. And I am interested in speakers that can do things I wouldn't do. There's a poem in the book called Peaches that gives people a lot, and another poem called Shovel. And both of the speakers in those poems I think of as very evil people. I don't think of them as monsters. I think we use that word because we don't want to admit the fact that people do evil things. But I do think of them as people doing very evil things that I have not done, and I pray I never do. I can't imagine doing some of the things that the people in those poems have done. But for whatever reason, the lines I had were going in the direction of those speakers.
There are many poems that are centered in their time. And you've talked about I never want to be a journalist. And I find that as an editor at the Missouri Review, you see a lot of poems come through at cultural moments, peak moments of that are dynamic and that are tragic. And a lot of people just want to write down what happened. And but the thing that you're able to do is to make art. And I don't know what the alchemy is for that necessarily, but is that something that's conscious to you, or is it more in the development of a poem, it just becomes the thing that the poem is? Because we're in these moments now where that's just part. I tell all the students that I ever talk to, like a piece of art is about when it is made. Regardless of what the subject claims to be, it's always about when it's been made.
So smart. It's so smart.
But, well, let's get past that and get to your answer.
That's good. I need to tell my students that. I'll tell them you said it. I will credit you properly. That's very smart. I like to be open to the possibilities of what a poem can do. I said this sentence yesterday, and the sentence was, I used to work for the city, which is the truth. I used to work for the city. But in a poem, that sentence automatically says other things other than the fact that I was the speechwriter for the mayor of New Orleans. Do you know what I mean? Suddenly, that sentence works on several layers. Now, I have been saying that sentence since I worked for the city. But for whatever reason, I only recognized it. Do you I only recognized that sentence, I used to work for the city, works on several levels, and with the right line above it and the right line below it can really have a huge amount of resonance. So there is a way that just saying what happened can lead to poetry. Do you follow what I mean? And I think what I'm much more interested in is whether or not the sentence, the line, I'm a person who likes to work in the line, there's some prose poem. I think there's a prose poem in every book I've ever written. Even in the tradition, there's a prose poem. I'm just saying this because, everybody thinks I hate prose poems. And I don't hate them, I just,
Right.
I would like to limit their proliferation. There's a way that, for me, it's about what the line can do. Whether the line if something means two things, you got to get at least two meanings out of the saying. And if I can get at least two meanings out of the saying, then I feel like I'm working in poetry land. I feel like I'm working with useful sentences. I feel like I'm working with lines of that which is undoubtedly poetry. And I think that's, if I'm doing anything different from anybody else that you're sort of describing in terms of sending poems out, that might be the only thing I'm doing differently. Like that I understand that the poem must work on the level, the way I teach it to my students is ground and sky. And that, poems work on the level of the ground, and the entire time they are working on the level of the ground, they should also be working on the level of the sky. Right, that the sentences, that the lines, though they might seem quite and very plain spoken, right, that they begin to have a kind of meaning that feels transcendent beyond just what you see is happening, right? So you can say about gardening, for instance, I make life grow out of the ground. And suddenly you're in poem land, but you're just really gardening.
This actually feels like a nice segue from the way that you're talking about that poetic line. If you're in poetry land, and that it's a line above and a line below that's gonna kind of help it breathe life into the rest of a poem. That feels like a good transition way to talk a little bit about the form that you invented. The duplex, because it does, the way that form operates does indeed, like all of those lines seem suggestive of each other and the mirroring of the first and the last. I wonder if you would talk some here for us today about what led you to decide that you were going to create a poetic form. And I wonder too, this occurred to me this afternoon as I was getting ready to kind of be here with you. It almost feels like to me that probably the first duplex that you wrote might be in this book. It just seems like it's something that arrived to you in a way where the first one was successful. But I don't know if that's the case. That's just maybe me mythologizing a little bit.
Well, I read the first one I ever wrote tonight. So yeah. I first, in order to answer this question, I have to just be I feel like I need to be honest about who I am. I'm a nerd, but I don't think I'm that big of a nerd.
Okay.
I'm not an inventor form kind of a nerd.
I'm gonna let you tell us who you are.
So what I mean is when poets would invent forms, as a poetry, I am a poetry reader, and that is a certain kind of a nerd. And when I'm reading a book of poetry and I realize, this is a bop or this is a golden shovel, and a poet has invented a form, I was actually a reader who would sort of roll my eyes, look who's got time on his hands. You're out here inventing a form, we don't have sonnets and pantoums and villanelles. Who are you, girl? Get out of my face. It's really how I thought about that. To be quite honest with you, I was everybody's writing in their little form, and so I didn't mean to become the person I was rolling my eyes at. What really happened is a few things happened. One thing that happened is there's this epigraph to a Nikki Finney book by A.J. Verdell, and that epigraph is "Repetition is Holy," which I loved. I remember reading that sentence and just falling in love with it because I believe in that. Like that, there's something about chanting. There's something about the repetition we hear in songs. There's something about just, that James Brown song, please, 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 please don't go. The number of times he says, please, it becomes a prayer, right? And there is, it seemed to me, something about repetition that was indeed holy. And I began to wonder if it was possible to write a poem that was only repetition, and if so, what would that look like? And that's really the germ of how the duplex was invented. And then I started thinking about other things that I think poets are always, like that's a poet thought.
Right.
Like that's actually, I mean, you know what I mean? Like that's not a very special, exciting.
Anytime you do another note.
Like, yeah, we're always like, oh, I wonder if I can write a poem that does this, or I wonder if a poem could actually do that. I've never seen a poem that X. I wonder if I can make a poem Y. You know what I mean? Or what is it like if I end in an abstraction? What is it like if I end in a concrete? Should I start with an image? Like that's how we're actually thinking, or I think that's how we're thinking. The other thing I wondered is whether or not there was anything in between syllabics and meter, which is why every line of the duplex is 9 to 11 syllables. I was wondering at that time in my life how I felt about the sonnet, why I have this very interesting, not very interesting, I think everybody, definitely people who read, I think everybody has a love-hate relationship with the sonnet, because you know what it is. If when people are like complaining to me about poetry, everybody wants to know what I do on the plane until I tell them I'm a poet. And they tell me I hate poetry. And I'm like, I just told you what I love, and you're telling me, right? Like we could have skipped this fight. Like, but all of those people know what a sonnet is. I mean, no, it's 14 lines. Do you know what I'm saying? Often know it's 14 lines of rhyme, iambic, pentameter. Do you know what I mean? And so I wanted to make a poem that was really what I was thinking over the last 10 years. And I just kind of took all my thinking and put it together to see what I could do, thinking that would lead to a poem. And so after I wrote the first duplex, I had all these lines laying around, and I had written it, and I don't advise this. This is something I would tell my students not to do, to think of a form and then fill it in. It seems like bad, like it's a bad idea, but it worked out. Sometimes, a bad idea will work. Isn't that something? I think this is how Spanx got invented. I know I'm being serious. Anyway, so Spanx are great. Anyway, so I printed every line that I had ever written in failed poems and in the notes app of my iPhone that was 9 to 11 syllables. I took all those pages and pages and pages and pages, a lot of pages of poetry. I made slivers of paper. I had already decided on my form. I knew my first line was my last line. I knew I was working with couplets. I think it's much more important that you think about writing couplets and you don't worry. There's this way that my students get frustrated, or anybody, I imagine, working on the duplex gets frustrated because we're thinking about the poem with our narrative mind. But if you think about the fact that the poem is a hustle, you can give up thinking about it with your narrative mind, and you can begin thinking about it with your mind of juxtaposition. Even, I would say, with the way you think of anything, like when you're looking at an artist panel and there are three, you put them together, each sort of works on its own. And yet they come together to have new meaning. Do y'all see what I mean? And so I think of the duplex as 7 couplets. And if you can make 7 gorgeous couplets, then you can look at them together and do the work you need to do in revision to make them have enough in common such that you have a duplex. And that's really how they get made. And I also think it's a good idea if the 2 lines of each couplet have absolutely nothing to do with one another.
Sure.
If you take 2 lines, this is, I was talking about this last night, this is In the Station of the Metro by Ezra Pound. I'm sorry I suddenly turned into a college professor. I'll get back to being just very silly in just a second. You know, that poem taken from ultimately Ezra Pound's biggest influence were the poets from the East, which would be the poets that invented the hustle, the Chinese poets in particular. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. The only reason we think those two lines have something to do with each other is because of Ezra Pound. Because when we look at them, they're on a page together. Do y'all understand what I mean? And that's really what the couplets in the duplex, I think, are doing. And you have that same principle in mind when you put those couplets together.
Yeah, you're just timesing Ezra Pound by 7.
And exactly. And then after I wrote the first duplex, which I read tonight, I said, oh, I have these other lines lying around. Because I can be that obsessive. After you make a poem, it's like, so what if the lines are lying around?
Right.
But then I'm like, oh, they're here already. Let's see if I can make another one. Now let's see if I can make another one. Now let's see if I could just write one without the lines.
Oh.
You see what I mean? Which now I've made so many I can write them. But I used to, they were made by pastiche, as so many of my poems are made. That is not to say, I want to be clear about this. That is not to say that I don't get a line and push.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
a lot of poems, a poem like As a Human Being from the tradition, I wrote because I had a line that was interesting to me, and from the point of that line, I just pushed until I got to the last line.
Well, I think that we have time for just one kind of like final question. You don't have to answer this extensively, but I'm very
Answer
curious.
short.
Yes. Because then we'll want to get into the. I mean, that's not exactly what I said, but okay. Because we do want a lot of time for some public Q&A. But I'm curious if just, as briefly as you'd like, what do you think is ahead in this world for poetry?
This, you mean Earth? It's always poetry's good, man. Poetry's always, I'm not worried about
You're not
poetry.
worried?
No. If people, poetry does the thing it does. I talked about this yesterday. The value of poetry is similar to the value of trees. We're not paying them any attention, but if they were all gone, we would notice they were gone. We would miss them. Everybody in this room has a tree. As soon as I say it, you remember your tree. And you either kissed on it or you used to climb it, or maybe something horrible happened, or maybe this is where you used to cut a switch. You know what I mean? But it's still yours. It's the tree you think of when you think of a tree. And that's our relation. That's what poetry does. It lives in us. We don't know how much it is animating us, nurturing us, nourishing us. Do you know what I mean? You don't get to name that. You don't get to say, oh, that's $100 poem. That's a $6 billion poem. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't work like that because it is beyond value. And I think because that is what poetry is, I'm not worried about poetry. And I still believe that poetry does make a difference, that it does do something. It's been a very difficult world for me, partially because I felt like I was a part of a kind of a movement, and that my work was somehow essential to it. Do you know what I mean? And to watch that movement end is difficult because it makes me wonder, well, then what the hell is my work? Does that mean my work was a failure? But I don't think my work was a failure because I think just like the work that I loved when I was a kid, the work that I loved as I was growing up, the work I loved when I was in school, the work I love now when I'm reading it, it changes me. It makes up, and maybe it doesn't do a thing such that I am able to tell you which grocery store to go to or who to vote for or anything like that. But I do believe that it makes a difference. The best email I ever got, I'll stop here, is I got an email from a Presbyterian minister after my first book came out, and he told me he read my book, and he said, I read your book, and it is definitely going to change some of the stuff that I am doing as a father. Most of the email was about his father. Oh, wow. And then the end of the email, he said it would change the way I relate to my son. And what else could I want?
Right.
I got that in my first book. So everything's lagniappe, you know?
All right, well, thank you very much, Jericho. Just a tremendous gift to have you here.
We'll open it up for Q&A. So who has a question?
My question is, do you send poems that you write about people to the people you write them about? And if you do, how do you make that not the most awkward thing in the world?
No, I mean, I don't know Diana Ross's address. so no. And I think it's a bad idea. I think there's this thing in our students where they write a poem and then they send it to their mom. And I just don't understand why you are doing that other than the fact that you are looking for conflict with your mom. You know, if you were a checkout person at Kroger, you would not expect your parents to go to school with you, to go to work with you, to watch you check people out. If you were an architect and you were designing a mall, you would not think that your parents could somehow help you design the mall because they're not architects. Do you follow what I mean? And so I just think whatever you're doing is what you're doing, and it goes where it needs to go. And if somebody's going to get it to that person, they will get it to that person. Thank you.
Is there another question?
Yes.
In the back.
Oh, for sure. Hi, I had a professor that was working with me in a creative writing class, and they said that a good poem should have 0 abstractions, so it should be very concrete language. I'm kind of on the fence about that, but I want to get your take on that recommendation.
Is that professor here?
They're not at this school, but they do go to Columbia College, so.
But they're not in the room.
I don't think so.
I don't know if that's enough assurance.
Are you this person's professor? No, you're not here. Okay, they're wrong. Part of the reason why that professor is saying that is because you have to earn abstractions. And one of the ways professors like to deal with that is to tell you not to write any. It solves a problem for us, you know? But if you can really think about, you know, we know this even from other forms. We know this, for instance, from essay writing, right? There's a topic sentence, which might be abstract, but then there are examples supporting that topic sentence, which we think of as concrete, right? And so we understand that the concrete image goes a further way to the emotion and the mind, right? That there's something about seeing the singular thing. Ronald Reagan was really good at this, by the way. I mean, Ronald Reagan, he destroyed welfare on this, you know what I mean? Like, he found the one person who had managed to take advantage of the welfare, the one person who had managed to take advantage of the welfare fund system such that she was living in the Waldorf Astoria. And after he found her, he had this wonderful example that made for the invention of the welfare queen. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so it's not that you can't have abstractions. It's that you want it. One of the things that we don't get to talk about in poetry is that it is a thing of timing. That there are certain things that you say because it's time to say them. There are certain ways of saying that get said in work because it's time to say them. And if you've built up enough energy around around concrete images, then an abstraction can indeed have a great amount of power in your poem. Thank you for that. Thank you for that question, brother. Thank you. Thank y'all so much.
All right.
God bless you.